Hello from Germany, my name is Martin Krolop, and today this video is about a very interesting comparison about two lenses, the TAMRON 35 to 150 mm and the Samyang with the exact same focal length and aperture opening, which is 2.0 to 2.8. We're doing this video in English. Normally our whole channel is in German, but we're doing this video because I haven't seen a lot of reasonable and interesting comparisons of those two lenses. And I've actually bought the Samyang lens and the TAMRON lens just recently, the Samyang lens from Amazon. But I've made very interesting findings about those two lenses, and I just want to be very short and quickly about the differences. So first of all, the TAMRON is the original lens. The Samyang is the copycat, and I've kind of like information from Telegram channels, Telegram channels, which is saying that TAMRON hasn't really allowed the usage of the construction, and that Samyang really did indeed copy the lens. I haven't confirmed it officially, but I've heard some very trustful comments about that topic. But actually, the lens is out. You can buy it. So if you can buy it and you can save around 500 euros between the two, the question is, how good is it, and what is the difference? So first of all, making a lens which is a third cheaper in price is not that easy, especially when the company producing the original lens already focused on a good budget lens and is not selling it for like 10,000 euros like Leica. You could make a Leica lens probably the same quality and make it much cheaper, but for a TAMRON lens to be like the same quality and cheaper is kind of a challenge. And they did indeed save that money in different aspects of that whole lens. So first of all, autofocus. We have tried a lot of photo shootings, and what I'm a big fan of using a lens and kind of making a blind comparison. Not knowing which lens I'm using is quite not possible, but would I notice? And the answer in terms of autofocus is not really. Not when using a modern Sony camera, and not when using the centered image framing area. So autofocus is not really a question with the two lenses, but other topics are. So first of all, what we found out is that 35 mm is not the same 35 mm on both lenses. As you can see here, the Samyang is longer. It is like about 37, 38, or even like 39 mm, which is a huge difference because the TAMRON, or the whole construction, 35 to 150, is already a bit weak on the lower end. So you don't have a 24 to 70, you start with 35, and if that 35 is not even 35, then it's kind of a big thing. The 150 mm is the same. So both lenses have the same field of view on the longer end, but they don't have the same field of the same focal length. It's actually completely okay if you construct, if you have focus breathing with lenses, but actually with the same construction, this is kind of very questionable. So let's go into that optical comparison. We tested the center and the outside, the corner sharpness, both ends, 35 and 150 millimeter, and always the most open aperture, so 2.0 and 2.8. What we found out is that both lenses are very strong on the 35 millimeter. The Tamron on the left side is a bit sharper. Probably you can see it underneath the green sticker, where the writing is a bit more intense. But as you can already see on the 1.8 in the background, the Tamron tends to be a little bit more greenish. And with using the same white balance and the same settings, if you switch between the two lenses, you can clearly see that the Samyang is kind of bluish in the whole image, whereas the Tamron is kind of greenish. So this probably has to do something with one of the big savings made by Samyang in terms of costs. Coating of lenses and glass, and especially the quality of glass, is super vital, and you can save a lot of money by buying cheaper glass and using cheaper coatings. You get the same construction, so the lens can have the same amount of lenses and groups and elements and whatever, but you can save a lot of money by just buying cheaper glass or cheaper coatings. And this is in fact something which Samyang has probably done. I know it quite sure because when we were outside in the field shooting, we tried to do some test photos with a model, and we actually wanted to focus on the sharpness by focusing on the eye. But what I found out is, without moving the camera at all, we had very strong flaring with the Samyang lens in terms of nearly no flaring with the Tamron lens. And we did several different like framings, and seriously, the Samyang is flaring a lot in comparison to the Tamron. And again, flaring has something to do with lens quality and coating. So the whole thing is kind of like a big arrow pointing towards where they saved the money. And that's very interesting, because you cannot produce a lens a third cheaper in price without having any restrictions or anything being lesser in quality. It's just not possible. When we looked at the corner sharpness, we noticed a very interesting effect, and yeah, there's a huge difference with the Tamron and the Samyang lens. But actually, I don't want to be too much focused on that difference, because for me as a people photographer, the corner sharpness is not that important. When you're shooting landscape or architectural photography, then probably it's way more interesting and way more important. But for me, this is kind of a very uninteresting area of the picture. Also, we noticed that we could not focus with both cameras. We tested how many cameras did we test? Like 4 or 5? 4, I guess. We tested all the cameras. We actually could grab at that moment, because we were not able to use the autofocus in the corner with the Samyang lens. And then we thought, okay, is the camera broken? And we tried the next one and the next one, and we did not get it because it was just not possible. Let me show you. This is the consecutive. You can see on the naming of the pictures that it's like 36, 37, 38, 39, and it's not getting sharp at all. So we had to use manual focus to get a corner sharpness, which is perfect. But we couldn't use autofocus with a Samyang. So very interesting fact. But to make it like a bit more practical, I did not find that out in real life, because I'm never focused there, like here on that corner part. I always focus in the middle or in the center, like rule of third, like kind of in that normal area, but not there. So this is kind of a thing which is a YouTube wow, but in real life, as a photographer, I just don't care. By the way, it was the same with using 150 millimeter. It was absolutely the same. The sharpness in the middle is quite identical with both lenses, at 35 and at 150 millimeter. the Samyang is always a bit less sharp. The corner, the Samyang, is noticeably lesser in sharpness than the Tamron. CAs, we tested CAs, and as you can see, again, we found that that greenish or yellowish look on the Tamron and the bluish cyan look on the Samyang lens. The CAs, chromatic aberrations, we always test with 3 forks in front of a softbox. So you have you always have different chromatic aberrations in front and behind the point of focus. So most of the time you have the reddish in front of the focus point, and then you have greenish or yellowish cyan in the back. Has something to do with wavelength and like rainbow. Huh? So let's get back to the both lenses. They actually are nearly the same. In terms of the build quality, I think Tamron also is noticeably better. The ring, for example, the focus ring is very smooth, but it doesn't jiggle at all. Is it jiggle? Like this one has a bit of free space to move around, so it's not that sturdy as with the Tamron. I personally like the coating of the Samyang more. I think the coating of the Tamron is a bit colder, a bit more glossy. I like the matte finish of the Samyang lens more. What I wanted to use was the buttons, but I could not because I didn't have the docking station for the firmware upgrades and the calibration and the setting of the buttons and the custom switches. So I could not use the whole lens. And again, this is something which is super annoying. With the Tamron lens, you have the Usbc port, which is, I think, the most modern way to connect anything to anything. USB-C, waterproof, water sealed in mobile phones. You can go diving with the phones. So the USB-C port is, in terms of practicability, a massive improvement. You don't need anything to buy extra with a Tamron lens. You just connect to the Tamron lens utility, and you could do all the settings and all the firmware updates. And even if you do a plain firmware upgrade for the Samyang, you have to use the dock, and this you have to buy extra, which is kind of like a hidden cost involved with the lens. So the cost or the money saved is kind of shrinking in a minute if you want to do firmware upgrades to your lens. How can we sum this up? I think Samyang did a very good clone of the Tamron, and they saved 1/3 of the price. And this is massive. They did it, and they still have a good lens. This is still a good lens. If I had to choose one of those lenses or any other lens, I would just still use those 2 lenses because I really love and admire the 35-150 2.0-2.8. I think the lens is so special and so unique that both lenses would fit my kind of demands. I personally think that the Tamron is the better lens, the original lens, and you get a lot more for the money you pay more. It's not that you pay more for the name, like with Leica or any other. G Master sometimes I think is the same, Nikon, but they all kind of have a bit of naming involved in the pricing. Tamron not. You get performance, and you get noticeably better performance. If you need it, that's another question. Coming back to the real-life testing and the model shoots we did, you don't see a lot of difference between the 2 lenses. Honestly, if you just focus on an eye, everything is fine. We did some mist filter testing with backlighting, which is super hard for the camera and the lens to focus on an eye. Both did quite okay for that situation. But seriously, if you have normal shots with good lighting, both lenses perform quite well. And if you don't use that f2.0 or f2.8, if you go down to f5.6, probably the difference is way smaller than noticed here, because we were actually using the 7R Mark IV, which has 60 megapixel, and if you're using a 30 megapixel 7 Mark IV, you only notice 50% of the difference. So like 50% resolution, 50% difference in terms of noticing of optical differences. So both lenses are cool. Tamron is the original one. Samyang is the absolute budget one, which is still better than a lot of other lenses produced for Sony E-mount. So hopefully I could help you with this review, and always take cool pictures, and keep in mind it's not the gear making the pictures, it's always the knowledge of the photographer taking the pictures.